Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about some not so good news for Deloitte. There's a couple of news stories that have come out recently about some issues that Deloitte has faced. The first one that we're going to discuss is a new record that Deloitte has set. And it's not a good record. It's a record fine that Deloitte has faced in the UK by the FRC. And we know that the Big Four accounting firms have been frequent targets of the Financial Reporting Council in the UK. And the firm was sanctioned in the UK, and so were two of their partners. They were fined $19.4 million, which is a record fine by the FRC. And these fines just keep on getting bigger and bigger for the Big Four accounting firms. But that's why the FRC has stepped up regulations on the Big Four accounting firms. And Deloitte also had to pay for the cost of the investigation, which was around $7 million. Richard Knights, who is a partner for Deloitte, was fined $647,000 and excluded from membership in the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England and Wales for 5 years. And Nigel Mercer, who is another partner on this engagement, was fined $323,000. And the engagement was Autonomy, and I'll speak a little bit more about it in a little bit. Now, as a result of this, Deloitte will have to provide a root cause analysis for the reasons of misconduct. And this relates to audits from financial statements from January 2009 to June 2011. And it relates to a company called Autonomy, which was acquired by HP in 2011. And that's why they investigated those years. And as you'll notice, this is almost 10 years ago. And what HP found out was that the executives at Autonomy were hiding losses. These executives categorized losses as expenses for marketing. So it's a little bit of an accounting trick there. They tried to make it seem like they're incurring a bunch of expenses related to marketing when it actually related to losses in the company. And HP then had to take an $8.8 billion write-down for this acquisition. And the total acquisition was for $10.3 billion. So they basically almost wrote down the whole thing. And HP later sold the company to Micro Focus. And the FRC claims that Deloitte partners were too friendly with the CEO of Autonomy. And the CEO is Mike Lynch. And the FRC stated that Deloitte and their partners were culpable of serious and serial failures in the discharge of their public duty. The partners did not act with integrity, objectivity, competence, due care, and professional skepticism. And Deloitte had a whole bunch to say, but mainly what they said is that they've improved their practices from a decade ago. And I don't think this is a practices issue here. They make it seem like there were some steps that the partners didn't go through, and it's just a lack of focus and audit partners not paying attention to their clients because they trust that their teams are going to get it done. And they get too cozy with their clients and the CEOs because, especially with Deloitte, because Deloitte has so much consulting work that they're worried about getting other work out of companies like Autonomy where they don't question anything. And it's been a conflict of interest issue for the Big Four accounting firms for forever. And the Big Four accounting firms have steps in place to prevent this, but they don't work that well because the partners run the Big Four accounting firms. So they can basically override any controls that are in place to prevent this type of activity. And they'll sign off on things that say that everything looks good. That's the audit, but they also sign off on other documents saying that they've assessed whether there's any fraud going on. And they do this without digging into things because this is a huge write-down, $8.8 billion, and these partners missed it. And these partners probably signed off on a lot of documents saying that they did their work and that everything looked good. And that's why they're personally being fined so much. Like that's a lot of money that they're being fined. But the other thing to remember here is the Big Four accounting firms have insurance that'll pay for this. And $19 million, although it's a record, is not much for them. It's a blip on the radar. So this is just the cost of operating. But the lesson to be learned here is that even though you can go about your day and not really focus on this stuff and get away with it from a Big Four accounting perspective, personally, it can destroy your career. This Richard Knights guy is not going to be able to work for 5 years, and he has to pay a lot of money. Hopefully he had that money saved up, but I'm sure he made a ton of money too, and that's why they're fining him so much. But his career is pretty much destroyed for 5 years. And I'm sure he'll come back and be able to do something. I'm sure he'll get some kind of accounting gig because he probably has a really strong network from this. The Big Four accounting firms need to improve ethical training. And it's not just ethics training, because ethics training does help, but it's mandatory all around the board. And when you get in the Big Four accounting firms, you have to take it every year and all the time. And it still doesn't improve things. It's tone at the top. There's a lot of things that need to get done, but ethics training is important. And there just basically needs to be more liability for the Big Four accounting firms, more liability for partners in order for this to actually have an impact. Because right now, it's just not making an impact. We keep getting these stories of these fines, and we'll be covering some news later about KPMG and some liability they're facing as well. But a $19 million fine for the Big Four accounting firms is not that much. It's not going to change the environment. The conflicts of interest still exist. I've seen it throughout my career, and I really haven't seen the environment change, especially in the US. In the UK, it seems like regulations are increasing, but in the US, there's really nothing that's being done. There's lawsuits, but it just doesn't matter for the Big Four accounting firms. They're always prepared for them, and they face them all the time, and they're willing to take them, because if you have thousands of engagements a year, if not tens of thousands, and you get sued on a few of those and you pay some money, that's just not that much money for the Big Four accounting firms. And it's especially not that big of an impact, because all the Big Four accounting firms have to do is pay this fine, this $20 million fine, and fire the two partners and just move on. There has to be more liability, more skin in the game for them in order for this to improve. But personally, you as a person that's listening to this podcast, keep your ethics at the highest standard. It's not worth risking your career and your livelihood to just buddy up to somebody and look the other way as they book erroneous accounting things. And a lot of the times you can spot this stuff pretty easy if you just dig into it. The only problem is there's so many checklists for associates and senior associates to look through, and they just copy and paste prior year data. And if somebody checked off on the account last year, then they'll check off on it this year without really digging into it. It's checklists, it's analytics that they run, but they don't really dig into anything. And you have to dig into anything, and you have to ask questions. And if something doesn't feel right, then document it and move on. But if somebody doesn't want you to document it, then move on to a different engagement. And you'll know when you're on one of these engagements, because the environment won't be good. And it won't be good on the engagement team, and it won't be good at the client. Move away from those clients. It's not worth getting wrapped up in those type of things. And same thing for working in industry. When you work at a company, and I worked at a company like this, where the adjustments they book don't seem right, just get out of there. It's not worth getting wrapped up in that. It's not worth destroying your career. It's not worth feeling like you're doing the wrong thing all the time. And with that, let's move on to the next story. So Deloitte is also being challenged in Florida over their bid on the Medicaid contract. As you might remember, Deloitte was awarded a $135 million contract by the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration. And IBM and Accenture have both filed challenges to this decision. And the challenge will go to like an administrative judge who will decide what to do next. And IBM's challenge focuses on the details of the contract, while Accenture's challenge focuses on Deloitte's past failings with the Florida's unemployment systems. And IBM says that Deloitte and Accenture have unfair advantages because they previously worked with Florida. Now, this is interesting here, and I'm sure this will only increase as the Big Four accounting firms and consulting firms try and get more government contracts, because these government contracts are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And a lot of the times, like here in Florida, it just goes to one firm, which is kind of crazy. And so of course you're going to have consultants that challenge each other's contracts and bids and do this. So this is something kind of crazy that's going on. I think it's valid for IBM and Accenture to file the challenges, but it's really just a war of some of the largest companies in the world going after hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's the public that I think really loses out here, because you don't really have a choice for who's doing your work and the level of service they're going to deliver, because who knows if IBM and Accenture are going to do any better. It's really hard, because you don't really know who's doing a better job on this stuff. It's just a matter of time before we figure it out. But it's all these humongous consulting firms fighting amongst each other. It's not just you're guaranteed a contract, and if you fail, you get sued. No, now you're going to have other consultants fighting you before you even get the contract, and then you have to perform, and then people assess your performance, and if you don't do a good job, maybe you get sued there. So there's a lot of liability here, but it's really worth the fight, because it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases, it's going to come down to billions of dollars as COVID-19 projects keep coming up for governments. As governments reach for more power, they can't do everything themselves. They don't have enough employees, so they're going to be hiring these consultants. So we're probably going to continue to see more of these fights around the world. Those are the updates for today. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel, and support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes to this podcast. And if you can't do that, then like and comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.